The rain fell like bullets against the pavement, each drop exploding in tiny bursts of neon reflected from the signs hanging above the narrow alley. Nangula Shalongo's lungs burned as she ran, her bare feet slapping against puddles that had turned crimson with blood she couldn't tell was hers or someone else's. The flash drive dug into her palm where she clutched it so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, voices shouted in Mandarin, words she understood perfectly, words that promised her death in excruciating detail. A gunshot cracked the night. The brick wall beside her head exploded in a shower of dust and fragments. She didn't scream. Couldn't. All her breath belonged to running now, to surviving the next 10 seconds, then the next 10 after that. Her designer dress, the one Li Wei had insisted she wear to dinner just hours ago, hung in tatters around her thighs. One of her diamond earrings, his gift, dangled from her lobe by a thread. The other was gone, lost somewhere between the penthouse and this godforsaken alley where the city's glamour bled into its decay. They say every city hides monsters. Beijing was no different. But Nangula had learned too late that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like charming businessmen with $1,000 smiles and promises wrapped in silk. Sometimes they look like Li Wei. Another gunshot. This one closer. She dove behind a dumpster, her shoulder slamming against metal that smelled of rot and desperation. Blood trickled down her arm where a bullet had grazed her. The pain was distant, muted by adrenaline and the certainty that if she stopped moving, she would die here, forgotten in an alley that reeked of garbage and broken dreams. The car screeched to a halt at the alley's entrance. Doors slammed. Footsteps echoed, multiplying. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, clutching the flash drive against her chest like a talisman. This small piece of plastic held everything. Trade routes. Bank accounts. Names of politicians and police officers on Li Wei's payroll. Evidence of trafficking operations that stretched from Shanghai to Lagos. She'd spent 6 months gathering it, translating documents she was never supposed to understand, copying files from computers she wasn't supposed to touch. 6 months of playing the role of Li Wei's prized possession. His translator. His trophy. His prisoner dressed in diamonds. A voice cut through the rain, smooth and cold as a blade drawn from ice. It spoke in Korean, not Mandarin, and it didn't shout. It simply said, in a tone that expected obedience, "Stand down." Nangula's eyes adjusted to the darkness at the far end of the alley. A man stood there, tall and impossibly still amid the chaos. Smoke curled from the cigarette between his lips, undisturbed by the rain. The neon signs painted his face in alternating shades of red and blue. Tattoos crawled up his neck, disappearing beneath the collar of his black shirt. Dragons and characters she couldn't read in the stuttering light. His eyes, when they found hers through the darkness, held no warmth, no curiosity, nothing at all. Just a vast, cold assessment. Li Wei's men hesitated. One of them spoke rapidly in Mandarin, gesturing toward Nangula. The tall man didn't respond. He took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly, and then looked past the men to where Nangula crouched behind the dumpster. She had no choice. No other options. No time. She pushed herself up on trembling legs and stumbled forward, her voice breaking as she gasped, "Please. Please hide me in your house. He'll kill me." The men studied her for a long moment. Behind her, Li Wei's men raised their weapons. The men raised one hand, a gesture so small it barely qualified as movement, but the effect was immediate. From the shadows of the warehouse behind him, other men appeared, armed, silent, forming a wall between Nangula and her pursuers. He dropped his cigarette into a puddle where it hissed and died. "Step inside," he said quietly, his Korean accented English careful and precise. Nangula didn't need to be told twice. She ran toward him on legs that barely held her weight. As she passed, he didn't look at her. His attention remained fixed on the men in the alley, on the standoff that balanced on a knife's edge. She stumbled through the warehouse door into darkness that smelled of oil and metal and something else, something dangerous she couldn't name. Behind her, she heard the man speak in Mandarin now, his voice still calm, still cold. "Tell Li Wei that his property is no longer his. Tell him Seo Minhyuk has claimed her." The name meant nothing to Nangula. But from the way Li Wei's men retreated, weapons lowering, feet stumbling backward toward their car, it meant everything. Inside the warehouse, hands caught her before she fell. Men with hard eyes and harder faces surrounded her, speaking rapidly in Korean. Guns pointed at her from every direction. She clutched the flash drive tighter, her entire body shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, leaving only pain and terror in its wake. The door opened. Min-hyuk entered, and silence fell like a curtain. He walked past his men without looking at them, his eyes fixed on Nangula where she stood cornered and bleeding in the center of his kingdom. Up close, she could see the tattoos more clearly. Dragons that wrapped around his throat. Characters running down his collarbone. Scars that told stories she didn't want to imagine. "You crossed a border most don't leave alive," he said, his voice carrying that same unnerving calm. Nangula lifted her chin despite the fear that threatened to drag her down. "Then I'll be the first." Something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth. Maybe respect. Maybe curiosity. He gestured, and his men lowered their weapons. "Bring her in," he said. "Nobody touches her." They led her through corridors that twisted deeper into the warehouse, past rooms filled with crates and weapons and men who watched her pass with eyes that promised violence. Finally, they reached a small room furnished with unexpected comfort. A bed. A chair. A table with a kettle and cups. Min-hyuk dismissed his men with a glance and closed the door. Nangula collapsed into the chair, her legs finally giving out. Blood dripped from her arm onto the floor. She watched it fall, each drop a small red flower blooming on concrete. Min-hyuk moved to a cabinet and returned with a first aid kit. He set it on the table, then poured water into the kettle and set it to boil. The domesticity of these actions felt surreal against the backdrop of violence she'd just escaped. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The men who just saved your life." He lit another cigarette, leaning against the wall. "The men you're running from won't step here. He knows what happens when he does." "Li Wei," she said, the name tasting like ash. "You know him." "Everyone knows Li Wei." Loud. Flashy. Thinks the world bows because he shouts. Min-hyuk exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "He's a child playing with matches in a room full of gasoline." The kettle whistled. He poured tea into 2 cups, the ritual precise and practiced. He set one in front of her. She stared at it, then at him, trying to understand this man who moved like death but poured tea like a monk. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "I haven't decided if I am." He sat across from her, his eyes dissecting her in the dim light. "You're carrying something Li Wei wants. Something worth killing for. That makes you either very brave or very stupid." Nangula's hand moved instinctively to where the flash drive pressed against her ribs, hidden in what remained of her dress. His eyes followed the movement. "Both," she admitted. "I'm both." For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his lips. "Almost. Clean your wounds. Rest. Tomorrow, you tell me everything. Then I decide if you live or if I send your head back to Li Wei in a box." He stood and moved toward the door. Nangula's voice stopped him. "What's your name?" "You already know it." "Your real name." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Seo Min-hyuk. Remember it. It might be the last name you ever learn." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Nangula sat alone in the room, the tea cooling in front of her, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief and terror that hadn't yet processed what she'd survived. Outside, rain continued to hammer against the warehouse roof, each drop a tick of a clock counting down to something she couldn't yet see. She cleaned her wounds with shaking hands, each touch of antiseptic a sharp bite that kept her grounded. The flash drive sat on the table now, small and innocuous. Millions of dollars in human suffering compressed into a few gigabytes. Evidence of atrocities committed in boardrooms and shipping containers. The reason Li Wei would hunt her to the ends of the earth. Memories flooded back unbidden. Li Wei's smile when he'd first approached her at the University Translation Center. "I need someone who speaks Ashwambo and English and Mandarin," he'd said. "Someone smart. Someone beautiful. Someone who can help me build bridges between Africa and Asia." She'd been flattered. Naive. Desperate for work to support her family back in Namibia. The job had started innocently enough. Translating business documents. accompanying him to meetings. Wearing the dresses he bought, the jewelry he insisted would help her fit into his world. Then the meetings changed. She started translating things that made her stomach turn. Manifests for shipping containers that carried more than electronics. Conversations about routes through Lagos that she knew weren't for legitimate goods. Numbers that represented not money but people. Girls from her own country, promised jobs in Asia, delivered into nightmares. When she tried to quit, Li Wei had smiled that charming smile and said, "You're my diamond, Nangula. You shine because I say so. You leave when I'm finished with you." She'd realized then that she wasn't an employee. She was property. And property that knew too much. So she'd started copying files. Late at night when Li Wei was distracted with his mistresses or his violence. Early in the morning before his men arrived. She'd taught herself to be invisible, to be what he expected while gathering the evidence that could destroy him. Tonight, she'd planned to run. She'd had everything arranged. A flight to Hong Kong, then South Africa, then home. She'd planned to send the files to Interpol from a safe distance. But Li Wei had discovered something. She didn't know what, didn't know how. At dinner, his hand had circled her wrist too tightly. "Where is it?" he'd asked, his voice soft and dangerous. "Whatever you stole from me, where is it?" She'd run. Through the penthouse, down emergency stairs, into the rain-soaked streets. His men had followed, guns drawn, orders to bring her back alive so Li Wei could kill her slowly, personally. And then she'd found herself in an alley, cornered and desperate, and a quiet man with cold eyes had offered her sanctuary. Nangula picked up the tea and sipped. It was good. Too good for this place, this moment. She wondered if Min Hyuk would keep his word. If the monster who'd saved her from another monster would let her live past tomorrow. Sleep came in fits, haunted by Li Wei's voice and the sound of gunshots. When she woke, pale light filtered through a high window. Her body ached. The wound on her arm throbbed. But she was alive. A knock at the door. Min Hyuk entered without waiting for her response. In daylight, he looked different. Younger than she'd thought. Maybe 30. His face held a kind of brutal beauty, all sharp lines and darker shadows. The tattoos on his neck continued down his arms. She could see them now that he wore a sleeveless shirt. Dragons and tigers. Flowers and flames. Words in Korean and Chinese and something she thought might be Japanese. "Eat," he said, setting down a tray with rice, soup, and vegetables. "Then talk." She ate because her body demanded it, each bite mechanical. Min Hyuk watched her from his position against the wall, smoking another cigarette. When she finished, he spoke. "Li Wei called this morning. He wants you back. Offered me money. Territory. Access to his shipping routes." Min Hyuk tilted his head. "He's desperate. That means whatever you took is more valuable than I thought." Nangula pulled out the flash drive and set it on the table. "This is everything. 6 months of evidence. Trade routes for human trafficking. Money laundering operations. Names of everyone he's bought. Ports in Lagos, Mombasa, Shanghai, Hong Kong. If this reaches Interpol, his empire collapses." Min Hyuk picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers. "And you risk death for this? For strangers you'll never meet." "They're not strangers." Nangula's voice cracked. "They're girls like me. Girls who believed in opportunity and found cages instead. I translated their contracts. I saw their faces when they realized what they'd been sold into. I have to stop him." Min Hyuk studied her for a long moment. "You risk death for strangers. That's rare. Stupid. But rare. And you," she challenged. "You're not exactly running a charity. This warehouse, your men, those weapons. You're a criminal too." "Yes." He didn't deny it, didn't elaborate. "But I don't trade in people. I have lines I don't cross." "Then help me." "Helping you means war with Li Wei. War is expensive. Loud. Bad for business. He's using your docks." Nangula watched his expression carefully. "I saw the documents. His shipments move through ports controlled by the CO family. He's been paying someone for access. Min Hyuk's face went very still. Very cold. Say that again. Your shipping lines. Your ports. He's been using them for trafficking. Maybe without your knowledge. Maybe with someone in your organization helping him. The temperature in the room dropped. Min Hyuk crushed his cigarette against the wall, the ember dying in a brief flare. Show me. She pulled out a laptop one of his men had provided and plugged in the drive. Files opened, spreadsheets and manifests and photographs. She pointed to specific entries, translating the coded language that Li Wei used. Here. Shanghai port. Container marked as electronics. But these numbers, they correspond to people. Ages. Origins. Destinations. Min Hyuk's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. Who authorized this? I don't know. The contact is listed only as JH. Someone close to your operations. Jin Ho. The name came out like a curse. My father's friend. I trusted him with the docs. Min Hyuk stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. He's been betraying me. Using my family's name for this. For the first time, Nangula saw emotion crack through Min Hyuk's controlled exterior. Rage, yes, but also something deeper. Betrayal. Hurt. The realization that someone he'd trusted had turned him into an unwitting accomplice to atrocities. He dies, Min Hyuk said quietly. They all die. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how this deadly confrontation unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Over the next days, Nangula learned about the men who'd saved her. Min Hyuk was third-generation Korean Chinese, his family having built a shipping empire in Beijing decades ago. But his father had died when Min Hyuk was young, killed by rivals who wanted their ports. His mother had followed 6 months later, grief and cancer taking her in equal measure. Min Hyuk had inherited an empire and the violence necessary to keep it. He ran his operations differently than Li Wei. Quiet where Li Wei was loud. Strategic where Li Wei was impulsive. His men respected him not out of fear alone but because he led from the front, because he never asked them to do what he wouldn't do himself. At night, Nangula often found him in the warehouse's training room, moving through combat forms that looked like deadly poetry. Precise. Controlled. Beautiful in their lethality. She watched from the doorway one night, mesmerized by the way his body flowed from one stance to another, blade work and empty hand techniques blending seamlessly. He noticed her eventually. Always did. Can't sleep. Dreams, she admitted. He nodded, understanding in that single gesture. He knew about nightmares. She could see it in the shadows that lived behind his eyes. You fight like you're praying, she said, stepping into the room. Min Hyuk caught a practice sword mid-spin, holding it still. Killing is prayer when the world worships violence. Every movement an offering. Every strike a meditation on mortality. That's beautiful. And terrifying. Truth usually is. He set down the sword. Your arm. It's healing well. Thanks to your doctor. She touched the bandage. Why are you really helping me, Min Hyuk? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he pulled his shirt aside, revealing a scar that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. My sister. Ji-yun. 12 years old when Li Wei's people took her. They thought she was me, that they could use her as leverage. When they realized their mistake, they killed her. Dumped her body in the river like garbage. Nangula's breath caught. Min Hyuk, I'm so sorry. I've spent 10 years building power. Waiting for the right moment to destroy Li Wei. You've given me that moment. He met her eyes. You're not a burden, Nangula. You're a weapon. The weapon I've been waiting for. Understanding dawned. You're going to use the evidence. We're going to use the evidence. But first, we're going to make Li Wei show his hand. Make him desperate enough to make mistakes. Min Hyuk smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. We're going to burn his empire down around him. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would leak information that Nangula had evidence, that she was preparing to go to Interpol. Li Wei would have no choice but to come for her directly, to bring his full force against Min Hyuk's warehouse. And when he did, they would be ready. But Min Hyuk hadn't counted on Jinho's betrayal running deeper than dock access. The attack came at dawn 3 days later. Explosions rocked the warehouse, fire blooming in sections Min Hyuk thought were secure. Li Wei's convoy, heavily armed and numerous, crashed through outer defenses that had mysteriously failed. Jinho, Min Hyuk snarled, understanding immediately. He gave them the security codes. His men rallied quickly, but they were outnumbered. Gunfire erupted in every corridor. Nangula grabbed a weapon from a fallen guard, her hand surprisingly steady. All those nights watching Min Hyuk train had taught her something. Fear was useless. Action was everything. A triad thug burst through a door, weapon raised. Nangula fired twice, center mass, the way Min Hyuk had shown her. The men fell. She felt nothing. No guilt. No horror. Just grim determination to survive. She found Min Hyuk in the main corridor, surrounded by enemies, his blade work a whirlwind of death. Blood painted the walls. Bodies littered the floor. He moved like a demon, like the monster everyone feared, and Nangula realized with strange clarity that she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. A man approached from Min Hyuk's blind side. Nangula didn't hesitate. Her shot took him down before he could fire. Min Hyuk spun, saw her, saw what she'd done. Something passed between them in that split second. Recognition. Partnership. Trust. You should have stayed down, he called over the gunfire. I've stayed down too long, she shouted back. They fought their way toward the control room where the flash drive was stored. Li Wei's forces were everywhere, a flood of violence that seemed endless. But Min Hyuk's men were better trained, more disciplined. Slowly, they pushed back the invasion. In the chaos, they found Jinho trying to escape through a side door. Min Hyuk caught him by the throat, slamming him against the wall. The older man's eyes were wide with fear and shame. Why? Min Hyuk's voice was eerily calm despite the violence raging around them. He paid me, Jinho choked out. So much money. And he threatened my family. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. Min Hyuk's hand tightened. You chose to betray my father's memory. You chose to make me complicit in trafficking. You chose Li Wei over honor. Please, Jinho begged. Please, Min Hyuk. Your father would want mercy. My father is dead because of men like you. Min Hyuk released him, and for a moment, Jinho thought he might live. Then Min Hyuk drew his pistol and fired once. Jinho crumpled. That was mercy. The battle raged for hours. Eventually, Li Wei's forces retreated, having failed to capture Nangula or the evidence. The warehouse was a disaster of fire and blood and broken concrete. Min Hyuk's men counted their dead. Too many. Far too many. But they'd held. And now Li Wei knew that taking Nangula wouldn't be easy. In the aftermath, Min Hyuk stood in his office, staring at the flash drive. Nangula joined him, her clothes torn and bloodied, her face streaked with smoke. He'll come again, she said. Harder. With more men. I know. Min Hyuk looked at her. We need to end this. Permanently. How? He smiled that terrible smile. We give him what he wants. We offer him you. The trap was elegant. A meeting at an abandoned shipyard, neutral territory where both sides could bring minimal security. Nangula would hand over the flash drive in exchange for safe passage out of China. Li Wei, arrogant and desperate, would never believe Min Hyuk would simply let her go. He'll kill us both the moment he has the drive, Nangula said as they prepared. Yes. Min Hyuk checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. If we're standing there when he arrives. The plan crystallized as he explained it. They would set up the meeting, make it look legitimate. But Nangula would already have uploaded the files to Interpol's servers remotely. The drive Li Wei would get would be empty, a decoy. And Min Hyuk's men would surround the shipyard from positions Li Wei wouldn't expect. If you come, you might die, Min Hyuk warned her. Nangula thought of the girls in those shipping containers. The lives ruined by Li Wei's greed. The death that had followed her from Lagos to Beijing. If I don't, he'll keep killing others. I'm done running. Min-hyuk studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You've changed. When you first came to me, you were running. Now you're hunting. I had a good teacher. The night of the meeting, rain fell again, as if the sky itself mourned what was coming. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusted cranes and rotting containers, the perfect stage for an ending. Li Wei arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, stepping out into the rain like a king gracing his subjects with his presence. He wore an expensive suit, perfectly tailored, his smile wide and confident. Behind him, a dozen heavily armed men fanned out. Min-hyuk waited in the center of the yard, alone by appearance, Nangula at his side. The flash drive sat on a cargo crate between them and Li Wei. The quiet Korean dog finally barks, Li Wei called out, his voice carrying across the rain. And he brings my property. How considerate. She's not your property, Min-hyuk said, his voice calm as always. Everything I touch becomes my property. Li Wei's smile widened. Including you, after tonight. You've made a mistake protecting her. Made yourself my enemy. But I'm feeling generous. Give me the drive and the girl, and I'll kill you quickly. Refuse, and I'll make you watch while I teach her what happens to thieves. Nangula felt Min-hyuk tense beside her, felt the violence coiled in him straining for release. But his voice remained steady. The drive is yours. Take it and leave. This ends tonight. Li Wei laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think I'm stupid? You think I'll just leave? No. Tonight, I take everything. The drive, the girl, and your head to mount on my wall. His men raised their weapons. Min-hyuk didn't move. The files are already uploaded, Nangula called out. Interpol has everything. Bank accounts. Trade routes. Every name you've bought. Every person you've trafficked. It's over, Li Wei. The smile died on Li Wei's face. What? Did you really think I'd come here without insurance? Nangula pulled out her phone, showing the confirmation screen. I sent everything 20 minutes ago. Your empire is burning. We just wanted you here to watch it fall. Li Wei's face contorted with rage. Kill them. Kill them both. Gunfire erupted. But Min-hyuk and Nangula were already moving, diving behind cover as the shipyard exploded with violence. From hidden positions, Min-hyuk's men opened fire, catching Li Wei's forces in a crossfire they hadn't expected. The battle was chaos incarnate. Rain and blood and muzzle flashes painting the night in violence. Li Wei screamed orders, his composure shattered, fighting now with the desperation of a man watching his world collapse. Min-hyuk moved through the chaos like death itself. Each shot precise. Each movement calculated. He carved through Li Wei's men with efficiency that was almost artistic. Nangula fought beside him, her fear burned away by determination. She wasn't the scared woman who'd stumbled into an alley anymore. She was something forged in fire and blood, tempered by necessity. Li Wei, cornered and desperate, grabbed a metal pipe and charged Min-hyuk directly, screaming incoherently. The fight was brutal and personal. Li Wei swung wild, all fury and no control. Min-hyuk moved like water, flowing around each strike, waiting for his moment. It came when Li Wei overextended, his pipe whistling past Min-hyuk's head. Min-hyuk caught his wrist, twisted, and drove his knee into Li Wei's ribs. Bones cracked. Li Wei stumbled back, and Min-hyuk raised his pistol. For Ji-yun, he said quietly. The shot echoed across the shipyard. Li Wei fell backward, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with shock. He stumbled toward the edge of the dock, his mouth working soundlessly, and then he fell, disappearing into the dark water with a splash that the rain quickly erased. Silence fell gradually as the last of Li Wei's men surrendered or fled. Min-hyuk's forces emerged from their positions, securing the area. It was over. Min-hyuk stood at the edge of the dock, staring down at where Li Wei had vanished. Nangula joined him, her hand finding his. Neither spoke. Words seemed insufficient for this moment, for the weight of violence and justice and revenge all tangled together. Is it always like this? She asked finally. The victory that feels like loss. Always. Min-hyuk's voice was tired, ancient beyond his years. That's how you know you're still human. Weeks passed. The world moved on as worlds do. Interpol launched a massive investigation based on Nangula's evidence. Arrests were made across 3 continents. Trafficking networks collapsed. Lives were saved, though how many remained impossible to calculate. Nangula stood in Min-hyuk's mansion, a place she'd been staying while the legal proceedings unfolded. It was nothing like his warehouse. Here, everything was elegant, minimal, peaceful. Like the man himself when he wasn't at war. She found him in his study, bandaged from wounds that were healing slowly. A simple ring sat on his desk. Gold with an inscription in Korean she couldn't read. "Ji-yuns?" she asked softly. He nodded, picking it up, turning it over in his fingers. "The only thing they returned to me." "I'm leaving tomorrow," Nangula said, though it hurt to say it. Interpol has offered witness protection. A new identity. A chance to start over. Good. Min-hyuk set down the ring. "You deserve that. A life without looking over your shoulder. What about you? They'll come for everyone connected to the docks eventually. Then I'm already gone." He smiled faintly. "I've been a ghost before. I can be one again." He pulled out a passport and handed it to her. Australian, with her photo but a different name. Real, not forged. "A friend owes me favors. Use it. Go live. The world owes you that." Nangula took the passport, her fingers brushing his. The touch lingered longer than necessary. "You were supposed to be a monster." "I am. But even monsters need someone to remember their names." She felt tears building, hot and unexpected. This man who'd saved her, who'd fought beside her, who taught her that strength wasn't just about violence but about choosing when to be violent. "Thank you. For being my house in the storm. And thank you for reminding me why some storms are worth weathering." The next morning, she left. The sun was rising over Beijing, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Min-hyuk didn't come to see her off. It was better that way. Cleaner. Some endings needed distance. As the plane lifted off, carrying her toward a new life, Nangula looked out the window at the city shrinking below. Somewhere down there, a quiet man with cold eyes and dragon tattoos was disappearing into shadows, becoming the ghost he'd promised to be. She touched her pocket where a small piece of paper rested. He'd slipped it into her passport. Just a phone number, nothing else. No instructions. No promises. Just a number. A connection. A possibility. "I ran from a monster and found another," she whispered to the window, her breath fogging the glass. "But this one taught me how to fight the dark. With silence. With precision. With honor." Below, the city faded into clouds. And somewhere in those clouds, she imagined, Min-hyuk was already gone, already transforming into someone new, carrying the weight of his violence and his mercy in equal measure. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of tension and emotion, don't forget to like this video and drop a comment below. What did you think of Nangula and Min-hyuk's story? Would you have made the same choices? Let me know your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, there's so much more coming. Deep beneath the surface of the river, a diver reported to the authorities days later as they searched for bodies. "No body recovered, sir. Current must have taken it downstream." The police closed the case. Li Wei was presumed drowned, another casualty of gang warfare that plagued the city's underbelly. But in the dark water, something glinted. A golden ring, not Ji-yun's, settling into the silt and mud. And near it, bubbles rose in a slow, steady rhythm. Li Wei's eyes opened in the darkness. The monster wasn't dead. Just sleeping. Waiting. To be continued.